Hey everyone, welcome to my Millionaire Maker lineup review. It is the end of week 4. We're going to week 5. I again have not won $1 million, but I thought instead of reviewing the lineup from this past Sunday, I would look at the first 4 Millionaire Makers and kind of just review all the lineups and see what they had in common and make some conjectures about what that means in terms of how we should be structuring our Millionaire Maker lineups. So I've already looked through some of these lineups and I did find quite a few things that are in common. Now, I'm not going to make definite assertions about what we definitely should be doing for our Millionaire Maker lineups, but I'm just going to make some speculation and you know, just think along with me, see if you notice anything as well, and I'd love if you guys communicated with me on Twitter about this, and we can figure this out together. But the first thing that I noticed was every lineup that's won the Millionaire Maker so far had an expensive, a skilled, and a non-chalk QB. So all the quarterbacks were under 10% owned. They're all elite quarterbacks, and they all were actually pretty expensive. So, or maybe actually in the case of one of them, they weren't. But they're all very skilled QBs. So Drew Brees in week 1 won the Millionaire Maker. Cam Newton week 2. Matt Stafford in week 3. And also you could count Aaron Rodgers, depending on which lineup you count as winning. We're just going to refer to Papa Gates because he's the pro here. And then week 5, Matt Ryan. So what does this mean about our GPP lineups? And I think one thing that this illustrates is just how unpredictable the passing game really is. I think there's a lot of things that need to go right to get that quarterback to have a high upside game. Like, for example, Matt Ryan, he threw for 500 yards. That means he needs to get the plays, he needs to have big plays, they need to be passing a lot. And that's something that we're just not sure is going to happen against a team at Carolina at home when they are such a run-heavy team. Matt Stafford, you know, we actually do probably in this game, I think they're 7-point dogs. We know they're probably going to pass it a lot, but 400 yards, that's also tough to predict. And it took some really big gains from Marvin Jones in order for Stafford to do that. Cam Newton, this actually was the only one that was semi-predictable just because a running quarterback in a matchup like that's going to do well. And then Drew Brees against Oakland. He was at home. Obviously, this is a great matchup. But he did throw for 400 yards, and it required a lot of big plays from Willie Snead and Brandon Cooks. So I think in general, the passing game is a little unpredictable. But what is predictable is that quarterbacks like Brees, like Stafford, like Rodgers, like Cam Newton, they're capable of having games that they're going to go off. And I think that in the Millionaire Maker, it's just important, especially if you're making multiple lineups, to just maximize these skilled QBs who have a chance to have this big game. And of course, stack with the wide receiver, with which all these players did. But yeah, I think the passing game was really interesting to predict. And I think that if you're too confident and you go with someone too much, it might cost you if your other players, your other value core players go off. So it's definitely something that I'm seeing here and I think should be considered for the future. Another thing I noticed, and this one I don't even think is theoretical, I think this is just good GPP strategy, and I'll explain why, is each lineup used at least one bargain running back. So in week 1, there are actually 2 bargain running backs that use Spencer Ware and Theo Riddick. In week 2, Al Smithsell used LeGarrette Blount at 4K. In week 3, Papa Gates used Shane Vereen, who was dirt cheap, 3,700. And in week 4, Steiner School used Isaiah Crowell at 4,400. So why is this good? The reason this is good is because running backs don't have as much variation in their performance as other positions like wide receiver. Actually, quarterbacks probably have the least, but because of this, guys like Crowell, if they get the volume, can actually perform just as well as the upper tier guys like Ezekiel Elliott, Todd Gurley, etc. You know, they don't have as much upside as maybe a Todd Gurley in a fantastic matchup or someone like that, but in a decent matchup, a guy like Crowell can get 100 yards and can get a touchdown, and that basically equals 20 plus points. So I think that in general, using a bargain running back in your lineup is usually smart because then you end up saving that money to use a high salary wide receiver like Julio Jones, like Antonio Brown, like Kelvin Benjamin and Marvin Jones, like AJ Green. And those are the guys that you want to have in your lineups because those elite wide receivers can have the highest scoring games. Running backs aren't going to score 50 points. Quarterbacks aren't going to score 50 points. Tight ends aren't going to score 50 points. So you want to be able to afford those elite wide receivers. And I think using a bargain running back is really smart and something that I will definitely continue to be doing in my Millionaire Maker lineups. The third one is they all had a cheap wide receiver go off. Now, this was really interesting. And I don't really think that this necessarily says anything about constructing your lineup because, of course, you need your cheap wide receiver to go off. You can't afford all high-priced wide receivers. You're going to have to use some cheap wide receivers in your lineup. So it makes sense that their cheap wide receivers went off. In this lineup was Steve Smith and Eddie Royal. Remember in week 3, Terrell Pryor. In week 2 was Travis Benjamin and Steph Diggs. In week 1, it was Willie Snead, who actually was 4,800 at the time. And so I don't think there's much to gain from this, but one thing to consider is if you're using a cheap wide receiver and this guy isn't a guy who can catch more than 5 balls and go for 100 yards and catch a touchdown, then he's just someone that shouldn't be in your lineups. And of course, I don't think most people are looking to play those people anyway, but it is something to consider. And which actually goes into my next point because actually all these lineups had 3 of their 4 wide receivers get that 100-yard bonus. And in fact, all of them had wide receivers in the flex. And good players have talked about this in earlier articles and strategies. I think this common knowledge is the flex position is tempting. It's tempting to use a running back. But in general, actually, that wide receiver is going to be the most optimal position to put into the flex because those are the guys who can have that insane upside game, especially on DraftKings, where they can have 8 receptions and 100 yards and get like 25 points, like you got like Eddie Royal at 3,500 or Steve Smith at 4,500. Running backs are usually going to have a tougher time doing that. And you're going to have a tough time finding multiple running backs who are cheap and do that at the same time. So I think that using that wide receiver in the flex position is definitely a smart move and is probably most optimal. Now, I'm not saying don't use a tight end or a running back in the flex. I'm just saying that it's a more optimal in general to look to use that wide receiver. And then the last thing I noticed, and this is kind of just funny, and maybe it tells us something, maybe it doesn't, but actually 3 out of 4 lineups had really terrible defense special team scores. In week 1, Randy Randerson had the Packers D, who had 5 points. In week 2, Al Smizzle did have the Broncos D that did quite well. But then week 3, Papa Gates had the Seahawks D, only had 3 points. And in week 5, Stein is cool, surprisingly won with the Cardinals defense with 5 points. So what does this mean? I'm not sure it means anything, but it does bring up the thought, does it matter if you go with a really contrarian D? May that be a pretty solid play? And it made me think because this week, actually, Buffalo's defense special team was probably the play, and it was probably about 1% owned. And it just makes you think that, maybe you can go with that contrarian defense and get some more points because it seems like, Cardinals D, we thought was going to do well. They don't do well. Seahawks D, we think they're going to do well against 49ers. They don't do well. Packers D against Jacksonville, we think they're going to do well. They don't do well. Defense is definitely hard to predict, especially because it's so turnover-based and especially touchdown-based. So I think that in general, it probably isn't a horrible idea to go contrarian at D special teams. It's just not. It's not something that you really. I guess I'll just say this: if you have a lineup that you're just loving and it has all the elements that I just described here, and you're stuck because you're like, man, I have to pay $2,600. I want this $3,200 defense, but I'm going to go with the Raiders instead. Well, I think that's a better mistake to make than to change that really good, well-constructed lineup. So, what did we learn? Maybe a few things, maybe we didn't. But I think it's cool to look at these Millionaire Maker lineups and just see what we find. Maybe this can help you have better line of construction in the future. Maybe it'll help me have better line of construction. But this is definitely fascinating to look at, and I don't think this is like the Bible of lineup construction. I don't think this is exactly how you have to construct your lineup, but I do think it's good insight about what makes a good lineup for these giant field tournaments like the Millionaire Maker. So as always, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please click the subscribe button and click the like button, and look for more and more of these videos as the week goes on. Thank you guys so much for watching.